The noise was the worst. Not a loud noise like a siren or a shout, which was bad but at least honest. This was a low noise, a hum of murmurs disguised as whispers, the scuff of shoes on a dusty floor, the rustle of cheap fabric. For Sofia Kowalski-Kahn, every sound was like sandpaper on her skin. She focused on the one thing she could control, the seam on her dress sleeve. It was a second-hand dress, the lace at her wrist rough and irritating. She pinched it, a small, repetitive pinching motion, with her thumb and forefinger. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The synthetic fabric resisted. The officiant, a man named Min Jones with a tired face, spoke words that seemed to have no meaning, floating like smoke in the stuffy air of the small registry office. Beside her, the man becoming her husband, Artem Koster-Brown, remained utterly still. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, even though they weren't touching. It was the only warm thing in a room that felt cold. She wondered if he too was counting something to steady himself. When it was time for him to place the ring on her finger, his hand was steady and surprisingly gentle. He didn't grab her. He guided the simple metal band over her knuckle with a precision that was almost respectful. It was the first time anyone had touched her that day without making her want to flinch away. It was the only moment of stillness in the chaos. How could a stranger offer comfort her own family? Never could. Hello, everyone. And where are you tuning in from today? Before we dive into this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our compelling journeys. Trust us, you won't want to miss what happens next. Sofia's life was a catalog of textures, patterns, and sounds. From childhood, she found solace in the world others overlooked. The way light fractured through a glass of water, casting tiny rainbows on the tablecloth. The perfect symmetry of fern fronds. The rhythmic, predictable hum of the washing machine in the dead of night. It was in these details that the world made sense. It was a language she understood. A language that didn't require eye contact or the deciphering of false smiles. Her room was her sanctuary. A small collection of smooth stones arranged by color and size. Books on botany stacked alphabetically by author. Her pencil drawings of seashell spirals and snowflakes, each a meditation on nature's order. Outside that room, the world was a minefield of unpredictable stimuli. Her mother, Hannah Larson, loved her in a loud, anxious way. Her love was a series of directives and corrections. Sophia, look at me when I'm talking to you. Sophia, why can't you be more like the other girls? Sophia, stop that rocking, people are looking. Each sentence was a tiny splinter, a reminder that she was wrong, that her very existence was a performance she was failing to execute. Hannah wasn't cruel, she was terrified. Terrified of a world she didn't believe, would have patience for her daughter. Her stepfather, Sebastian Demir, was a man worn down by work and worry. He was a man of heavy silences and deep sighs. He saw Sophia not as a person, but as a problem to be solved, a puzzle whose pieces he couldn't fit. His presence in the house was a constant reminder of his obligations and failures. The overdue electricity bill, the car that needed repairs, the daughter who would never be independent. He worked odd construction jobs, coming home with calloused hands and dust-covered face, bringing with him the scent of sawdust and frustration. For him, love was expressed in terms of practicality. Ensuring Sophia was fed and clothed was the limit of his emotional capacity. The complexity of her inner world was a luxury he felt they couldn't afford. Sophia's only respite was the public library, a place where silence was a rule, not an anomaly. Evelyn Petrescu, the head librarian, was a woman with graying hair pulled into a bun and glasses, perched on her nose. She never demanded Sophia speak. For years, Sophia simply sat in a corner, reading about faraway ecosystems. Then one day, Evelyn quietly placed a new book on her table. "I thought you might like this," she whispered before moving away. It was a field guide to local flora. From that day on, a ritual formed. Sophia would draw the plants she found on her solitary walks, and Evelyn would help her identify them, communicating through notes scribbled on scraps of paper. The library was the only place Sophia wasn't a problem to be solved, but a person with an interest to be nurtured. It was a haven of peace in a life that felt increasingly besieged by her family's anxiety. They saw her love of plants and patterns as a childish distraction, a waste of time. They couldn't see that it was her way of praying, of finding order in a chaotic universe. And this lack of understanding would soon become the foundation for the most devastating decision of her life. The pressure began, subtly, like a hairline crack in a wall that slowly spreads. "You need to think about your future, Sophia," Hannah would say, stirring a pot on the stove. "We won't be here forever." The phrase was a weapon, loaded with love and guilt in equal measure. The future was an abstract, terrifying concept for Sophia, a nebulous landscape filled with expectations she didn't know how to meet. Sebastian was more direct. He'd spread job ads across the kitchen table, circling openings for stock clerks, packers, receptionists. Each red circle was a silent cry of desperation. They pushed her toward an interview at a supermarket. The manager, a man named Pierre Renaud Thompson, spoke too fast and gestured too broadly. The fluorescent lights hummed like an angry swarm of insects. The beeps of the checkout counters, the overhead announcements, the wail of a child in the cereal aisle, it all merged into a wave of sound that left her dizzy and nauseous. She couldn't formulate an answer to, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" She could only see herself fleeing the building. The interview ended with a limp handshake and a "we'll be in touch" that both knew was a lie. She returned home in silent tears, the weight of failure a physical ache in her chest. Hannah's reaction was frustration disguised as sympathy. "Oh, honey, don't worry, we'll try something else." Sebastian simply shook his head and left the room. The something else was a string of advice from people who understood nothing about her. A cousin suggested she just smile more. A neighbor told her she needed to try harder to socialize. Each piece of advice was a small blow, reinforcing the idea that she was fundamentally inadequate. The false hope devolved into a cycle of humiliation. The factory interview, where the roar of the machinery triggered a sensory overload in the parking lot. The stint at a coffee shop, which lasted 2 days before the constant need for social interaction, left her utterly depleted, unable to get out of bed. It was Sebastian who brought the solution. He arrived home one evening, a strange expression on his face, a mixture of resignation and what he might have mistaken for hope. "I met a man at work," he announced to Hannah, keeping his voice low as if Sophia weren't in the next room hearing every word. "His name is Artem Koster-Brown. He's quiet, hardworking, no family, no drama, lives alone, keeps to himself." Hannah looked at him, and a silent understanding passed between them. Sophia felt a chill. She knew what was coming. They weren't trying to find her a job anymore. They were trying to find her a caretaker, someone to take on the burden. "He's a good man, Hannah. Poor like us, but decent. He won't expect much." The unspoken word hung in the air. Normalcy. They saw Artem as a safe option, a man who wouldn't have many choices and therefore would accept Sophia as she was, because he himself had nothing to offer. The idea was planted, a poisonous seed in fertile soil of desperation. They presented it to her not as an opportunity for Sophia's happiness, but as their only way out. Marriage became the final answer, the ultimate false hope for a problem they never truly attempted to understand. The ensuing conflict wasn't a war of shouting and slammed doors, but a campaign of emotional attrition. Conversations began to revolve around Artem. "He seems so gentle, Sophia," Hannah would say, her tone artificially bright. "Sebastian says he's a hard worker and never complains." Each compliment to Artem was an implicit criticism of her. He was the antidote to her difficulty. Sophia tried to protest. "I don't know him," she said one night, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to get married." Her mother's reaction was swift and sharp. "And what's the alternative? You'll stay in this room forever? Who will take care of you when Sebastian and I are gone? Have you thought about that?" The guilt weapon deployed once more. Their logic was a no-exit labyrinth. They loved her, so they wanted what was best for her. What was best for her was security. Security came with a husband. Therefore, marriage was an act of love. Her refusal was, by that twisted logic, an act of selfishness. Sebastian cornered her in the kitchen a few days later. His approach was different, devoid of any emotional veneer. "Look," he said, his voice low and raspy, "this world isn't made for people like you. It's harsh and unforgiving. This man, Artem, he's willing. He's not asking for a beauty queen or an intellectual. He just wants a quiet companion. It's a chance. Probably your only chance of not ending up alone and on the street." His words weren't spoken with malice, but with a pragmatic brutality that was even more painful. He saw no value in her, only vulnerability. They arranged a meeting, an awkward coffee date at a noisy diner. Artem Koster-Brown was exactly as Sebastian had described, quiet. He had large calloused hands from working, but his movements were deliberate. He didn't try to fill the silence with small talk. He ordered his coffee and waited. What was most remarkable was that he didn't insist on eye contact. His gaze settled on his cup, the table, the window, but rarely directly at her, and when it did, it was brief, almost shy. For Sophia, who had spent her entire life being instructed to look people in the eye, this lack of demand was a breath of fresh air. He didn't seem to judge her. He seemed calm. They met 2 more times, always with Hannah and Sebastian hovering nearby, orchestrating the interaction. Sophia barely spoke. Artem didn't either. The shared quiet between them was misinterpreted by her parents as compatibility. To them, 2 silences added up to a future. For Sophia, Artem's silence was simply less frightening than the noise of the rest of the world. The pressure at home became unbearable. There was an air of constant expectation. Any hesitation on her part was met with sighs of disappointment and reminders of her situation. She felt like a piece in a game whose rules she didn't understand, being moved across the board against her will. In the end, she relented, not with a joyous yes, but with a weary nod. It was surrender, not choice. She agreed to marry a poor, strange man to escape the prison of her family's suffocating love. She exchanged one family cage for an unknown one, hoping, against all odds, that the new one might have a little more room to breathe. The ceremony at the registry office was the formalization of her defeat, the final punctuation mark on her fight for autonomy. Or so she thought. The apartment Artem rented was small, with thin walls and second-hand furniture. The smell of fresh paint hung in the air, an attempt to mask the musty odor. For Sophia, it was new territory, full of unfamiliar textures and sounds that kept her in a state of constant alert. For the first few days, she barely left her room. She expected life with Artem to be a continuation of life with her parents, a series of unspoken expectations and gentle corrections. She expected him to try and change her, to comment on her habits, to force her to speak when she wanted to remain silent. But Artem did none of that. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic declaration or a grand gesture, but in a series of eloquent silences. He would wake early for work and leave before she was awake. When he returned home in the evening, tired and dusty, he would simply nod at her and go to shower. He never turned the television up too loud. He never left his dirty shoes in the middle of the floor. One night, he found her in the kitchen, reorganizing the pantry. She had taken out all the cans and boxes and was lining them up by color, then by height. It was a calming ritual for her, a way of imposing order on her chaotic new environment. She heard his footsteps behind her and stiffened, bracing for a question, a critique. "Why are you doing that? It's not practical." But Artem just stood in the doorway for a moment. Instead of speaking, he turned, went to the living room, and returned with the small spice rack that sat on the counter. He placed it on the floor beside her, without a word, and then went into his room. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but to Sophia it was monumental. He hadn't questioned her. He hadn't judged her. He had seen what she was doing, and in his own quiet way, he had helped her. The real shift, the quiet turning point came a week later. Sophia spent hours at the window watching a small patch of weeds in the courtyard of the building. She was fascinated by the resilience of one particular plant, with tiny purple flowers. She drew it in her sketchbook, capturing the delicate structure of its petals and leaves. That evening, when Artem came home, he noticed the drawing left open on the coffee table. He paused and looked at it for a long time. Sophia watched from the crack of her bedroom door, her heart thrumming. The next day when she woke, there was a book on the kitchen table next to her mug. It was a used paperback botany guide, Wildflowers of the Region. A yellow sticky note marked a page. On the page was a professional illustration of the very plant she had drawn, identified as Prunella vulgaris. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to. He had seen her. He had paid attention to something that everyone else in her life had dismissed as a quirk. He hadn't just tolerated her inner world. He had given her a tool to explore it. That night, for the first time, Sophia didn't eat in her room. She sat at the small kitchen table, across from Artem, and they ate in a silence that was no longer awkward or tense, but comfortable. It was a silence that spoke of mutual respect, a safe space he had built for her, brick by quiet brick, without ever uttering a word. The bridge of silence between them began to be filled with small victories. One day, while flipping through the botany book he'd given her, she carried it into the living room where he was reading the newspaper. She didn't say anything, just pointed to an image of a wild orchid. He looked at the image, then at her. "Beautiful," he said, his voice low and a little rough from disuse. "I think I know where some of those grow, near the old aqueduct." It was the first conversation they'd had that wasn't about logistics or household needs. It was about something she loved. The following Saturday, he took her there. They walked a wooded trail, and he let her set the pace. He didn't rush her. When they found the orchids, a small cluster of delicate flowers growing in the shade of a rock, he didn't say anything. He simply sat on a nearby rock, while she knelt to observe, to draw, and, for the first time in a long time, to genuinely smile. Inspired, Sophia began to venture into the kitchen. Cooking was like botany, a matter of rules, measurements, and predictable reactions. It was a form of order that resulted in something good. She started with simple dishes, following recipes with precision. One night she made a stew. When Artem came home, the aroma greeted him at the door. He stopped, inhaling deeply. "Smells good?" he said. During dinner, he took 2 helpings. "This is really good, Sophia," he said, and there was a warmth in his voice she had never heard before. It was a simple compliment, but to her, it was a validation. She had contributed. She had created something of value. The biggest victory came from an unlikely source, Artem's toolbox. It was a chaotic mess of nails, screws, screwdrivers, and odd tools she didn't recognize. The disorder bothered her. One day while he was at work, she emptied the box onto the floor and spent the entire afternoon organizing it. She used empty glass jars to separate nails and screws by size. She lined up the screwdrivers in increasing order. She cleaned each tool. When Artem returned and saw the perfectly ordered toolbox, he stopped and stared for a full minute. Sophia held her breath, fearing she had overstepped a boundary. He turned to her, and for the first time he smiled. Not a big smile, but a small upturn of the corner of his mouth. "I'll never be able to find anything again," he joked softly. Then he grew serious. "Thank you. This is amazing. I could never do this." In that moment, he didn't see her as a person with deficits to be managed. He saw her as someone with a skill, a strength he didn't possess. Her ability to see patterns and create order wasn't a quirk. It was a talent. In that simple apartment, surrounded by second-hand furniture and living a supposedly poor life, Sophia was slowly discovering she was worth something. And that discovery had nothing to do with money. Life with Artem settled into a rhythm, a silent dance Sophia began to understand and appreciate. Quiet mornings, shared dinners, weekends spent hiking or simply reading in the same room. She realized the exhaustion that had constantly plagued her when she lived with her family had disappeared. It was because she was no longer performing. She no longer had to expend all her energy trying to seem normal. With Artem, she could just be. This freedom was both exhilarating and profoundly calming. She began to reflect on the difference between her family's care and Artem's. Her parents loved her, she didn't doubt that, but their care was conditional. It was an effort to sand her down until she fit into some odd-shaped hole they called a normal life. They wanted her to change for their comfort, to alleviate their anxiety. Artem's care was different. It was an act of observation, not correction. He didn't try to change her. He adapted to her. He built a framework around her where she could flourish on her own terms. He didn't push her into the noisy world, but created a quiet world for them to share. He didn't force her to speak, but learned to read her actions. He saw her, and by being seen, Sophia began to see herself differently. For the first time, she didn't feel broken. She felt unique. Her sensitivity to patterns wasn't a flaw. It was what made her a gifted artist. Her need for routine wasn't rigidity. It was what made her organized and dependable. The things her family saw as liabilities, Artem, without ever saying it, treated as assets. She began to feel an affection for him that startled her. It wasn't the passionate, dramatic love of novels, but something deeper, more solid. It was a sense of gratitude that ripened into trust, and trust was blossoming into a genuine bond. She cared about his well-being. She worried when he came home from work looking more tired than usual. She found joy in doing something that would make him smile, like making his favorite meal. Living in poverty with him was more enriching than anything she had ever experienced. The simplicity of their lives allowed the small, real things to shine. A shared book, a delicious dinner, a comfortable silence. She thought she had been forced into a life of hardship, but instead she had found a peace she never imagined possible. She had no idea the simple, honest foundation they had built was about to be tested in the most shocking way imaginable. The tranquility was shattered by a call from her mother. "We're in town, thought we'd pop by and see how you're doing," Hannah chirped, her usual forced cheerfulness. "We'll bring a cake." Sophia felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The safe world she and Artem had built was about to be invaded. When Hannah and Sebastian arrived, they filled the small apartment with their restless energy. They looked around with a mixture of pity and justification. "It's cozy," Hannah said, running a finger along a shelf. Sebastian got straight to the point. He began talking to Artem about the struggles at work, inflation, the mounting bills. The visit wasn't social. It was the prelude to a request for money. They treated Artem with a condescending familiarity, like an equal in their struggle, but also like someone from whom they ultimately felt superior. And they treated Sophia as they always had, like a child. "Are you eating well, dear? Is he taking care of you?" Hannah asked, ignoring the fact that Sophia had made the coffee they were drinking. In the middle of Sebastian's monologue about their financial woes, a sleek black car pulled up outside the building. No one paid it any mind except Sophia, who noticed how out of place it looked on the worn street. Moments later, there was a firm knock at the door. Artem, who had been listening to Sebastian patiently, rose to answer it. At the door stood an impeccably dressed woman in an expensive pantsuit. It was Kiara Tanaka Haddad. She held a leather briefcase. "Mr. Koster Brown," she said, her voice clear and professional. "My apologies for the interruption. We need your final signature on the Asian Division merger documents before the Tokyo market closes." Hannah and Sebastian froze, their coffee cups halfway to their mouths. The dissonance was total. The man they knew as a simple construction worker, the man they were about to ask for a small loan, was being addressed as Mr. Koster Brown and discussing Asian mergers. Artem glanced at Hannah and Sebastian's shocked faces, then at Sophia. There was a flicker of regret in his eyes. He took the briefcase from Kiara, signed the papers swiftly, and handed them back. "Thank you, Kiara. Let the team know I approve the plan." "Yes, sir," she said, before retreating as discreetly as she arrived. The silence in the room was deafening. It was Sebastian who broke it, with a nervous laugh. Is this some kind of joke?" Artem turned to them. "No, it's not a joke. I own the development company. Several, actually." The revelation landed like a bomb. Hannah and Sebastian's expressions shifted from shock to thinly veiled greed in seconds. "Sophia, oh my goodness, you've landed yourself a good one," Hannah exclaimed, rushing to hug her daughter, who flinched at the sudden contact. "We always knew he was a good man, a man of substance." The hypocrisy was so thick it was suffocating. But Sophia wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Artem, and the only thing she felt was the ice of betrayal. The entire foundation of her life, the simple honesty she believed they shared, felt like a lie. Artem saw the pain on her face. "Sophia," he said softly, ignoring her parents, "I never wanted to lie to you. I was tired of people who only saw my bank balance. I wanted someone to see me. Just me." And then, something clicked in Sophia's mind. The revenge, the twist, wasn't about the money. It was about what the money revealed. She looked at her mother's greedy face and the opportunism in her stepfather's eyes. And she looked at Artem, the man who had respected her when he had, in their eyes, nothing to offer. The calm she had cultivated over the past few months descended upon her. She straightened up, growing taller than she had ever felt. She took a step forward and, to everyone's surprise, took Artem's hand. "Artem and I," she said, her voice clear and firm, "will be making a significant donation to a charity that helps autistic adults find independent housing and support." She paused, looking directly at her mother and stepfather, who were now staring at her with a new, desperate attention. So they never have to find themselves in the position you put me in. The blow landed squarely. Hannah's face paled. Sophia then turned completely to them. As for you, you have received all the help from me you ever will. Please leave. She spoke with a final authority they had never heard from her. Stunned and humbled, they rose and moved towards the door in silence. Before they exited, Sophia added one last thing, her voice cutting like glass. I believe Chiara can validate your parking. The door clicked shut, leaving Sophia and Artem alone in the quiet. Their lives had changed forever, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. She had found her voice not because of his money, but because of the worth he had helped her find in herself. True wealth isn't found in a bank account, but in the rare and precious experience of being truly seen and accepted for who you are. It's finding someone who doesn't try to fix your broken pieces, but who admires them as part of a unique mosaic. For Sophia, the greatest fortune wasn't discovering her husband was a billionaire, but discovering that she, with all her supposed imperfections, was priceless. If this story touched you in any way, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. You never know who might need to hear a message of hope and empowerment like this today. Share and help spread the idea that true strength often resides in the quietest of places.